Welcome back, everyone. Today we need to dive into a little bit of what we saw during Playtest 8 this past weekend, along with the news that the infantry overhaul is coming to the live version of Squad on September 27th in the form of Squad V6. So we're going to talk about a couple rounds I had this past weekend that I felt were very on point for the infantry overhaul. We're going to talk about the dev blog OWI posted with some results from the playtests, along with some of my overall impressions, including thoughts on this release date. So if you're new or you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like, drop a comment down below with your thoughts on the playtest or what you see happening in Squad. You may already be aware that all of the factions are now incorporated into the playtest, so we have all the weaponry now updated with the infantry overhaul mechanics. So what was Playtest 8 about? Well, it seems to be primarily around bug fixes, maybe some tweaks and adjustments to weaponry, along with some performance optimizations. So speaking of performance, what did I notice? Well, it seemed like things operated relatively smooth. I think there's still a little bit of a frame drop when you're going into ADS. However, it felt a little bit more polished, like going in the right direction. Still probably incomplete, but something just seemed a little bit more smooth with the process of bringing up the scope and looking through, where it just wasn't jagged frames, which is something that I still witnessed all the way through Playtest 7. That's very welcome to see that this may be improving. It also appeared like my screen in general just felt a little bit sharper, but I don't know if that was more of an in-progress thing or what, but it seemed like sharpening was slightly turned up, and that wasn't a setting that I changed. I did notice that while ADSing, the scope felt more crystal clear, whereas Playtest 7, I thought it felt muddy at times, and I don't know if that was a performance thing or what. Maybe it's just me, but I noticed more clarity in the scope for Playtest 8. And that's really significant too, because OWI has been changing how name tags work above players, so you need to be able to make a clear distinction of what you're seeing as quickly as possible. Not to mention, the mechanics are still pretty punishing, so you want to be able to identify a target and start shooting very fast. So overall, from a performance perspective, it seemed pretty smooth. I didn't have any crazy issues, maybe one crash in all, which was an Unreal crash, but outside of that, the performance I witnessed seemed to be okay. Granted, it could still use, more work in general. We know OWI needs to spend more time kind of optimizing and getting things where they need to be in general with Squad, so hopefully that still continues to improve. Now, while playing many of the playtests, I've seen kind of ups and downs in terms of the performance of the team itself. In some situations, and I've mentioned this in the past, I've run into whole servers that seem like it's a lot of new players, which is kind of surprising because I always thought that the playtest would primarily be made up of, veteran players, folks that know a lot about Squad wanting to see what the next iteration of it is. But obviously, no matter what server or what time you're joining, it's a roll of the dice to see what your team sort of operates like. And in some situations, that's been not so great, and some it's been okay. I played a handful of games this past weekend for the playtest, and there were two games that I felt were sort of remarkable in the sense that they felt more like the intended effect was taking place. The intended effect of the infantry overhaul was actually kind of happening and unfolding in front of me. So one was on Goro, where the middle point was Neva Upper, the other was on Mutaha, where the middle point was Police Station. And what was interesting about it is the firefight of these 2 points lasted almost the entire round. In both rounds, the objective kept switching teams. So every few minutes, one side was gaining tickets and then the other side would gain tickets, and these drug out the rounds, but also the firefight never really moved too far off the point. That's not to say there wasn't an attempt to attack the next objective or you didn't have to fall back and play defense. Both happened. However, the intensity of the fight on those middle objectives was noticeable. There was so much clawing and pushing and trying to find each team's way into those objectives that it made for a lot of fun. On Goro, it became a lot about terrain and utilizing different positioning to try to hold off the enemy team. For example, we were pushing from the southeast side and we kept running into basically a wide line of infantry all across a hilltop. And anytime our team tried to sort of circumvent that or flank, they were typically met with some form of resistance, which was later backed. There was no significant coordination to do something like mech infantry, which I think would have offset this a little bit because the Habs weren't in some secret position. They were pretty well known and we just couldn't really get access to it because we were constantly fighting up a hill. Whereas they couldn't really push down the hill, so it just created a little bit of a standstill, but I don't want that to sound like a negative. Because while it was a significant standstill, like no team was going to really own that objective fully because we couldn't really get to each other's Habs for various reasons, but the other thing is that there was also these dynamic moments where one team was pushing the other team from the north, and then you'd have to kind of counter that on the south side, and it just kept rotating. And ultimately, I think the point changed possession 3 times, maybe more, maybe 4 or 5. So this lengthened the match, obviously, and created a really long, intense firefight that existed over this one objective. It also had this interesting effect where there was really no huge change in momentum. No team really gained anything that massively significant to push to the next objective. It also seemed to heighten the need to really be focused on your positioning, individual positioning with your group. I saw LMGs on the hill laying down cover fire with guys were moving behind them to reposition and cover flanks. It was really fun, and it gave you a pretty good sense of what's trying to be created by the infantry overhaul. Like, no team or no squads are pushing really far outside of their element. People are sticking together more, relying on cover fire and suppression. Those tools coming to life are really fun to see. On the Mudaha round, we had a little bit of a different scenario where police station became the focus. Now, this became the central area for most of the firefighting, but also we were able to push the enemy team back to blockade. This was still early in the round, so we knew we were going to have to, try to hold police station while also taking blockade, but that didn't seem to be an effective strategy. The enemy team kept getting position on police station to keep us a little bit on our toes. So two dynamic firefights are happening, one for police station and then one for blockade. The enemy team was using a lot of cover and buildings to basically lay down fire on top of blockade, whereas police station was a lot about trying to find good hab placement because there's not as much room to work with there. Ultimately, this round was sort of the same thing. It came down to these two fights. After we captured blockade early on, they retook it and we can never quite regain our position. Guys were just sort of, hanging on to whatever they could at blockade to keep us off that objective, whereas police station then became the focus of both teams. What I saw from not only the squad I was operating within and other squads is a significant amount of teamwork, working together to push objective, which is obviously what you want to do. Whether it's a hab or a flag or whatever you're working towards, it was a relief to see how much guys were working together. Because it was such a scrappy fight on police station, there was also this sense of we can take some risk, we try to make another push for blockade, we could set up another hab, and this was heavily reliant on vehicles, whether it was a transport, a logi, or something like that to get us into position. Guys weren't just running across the desert to get somewhere, which was a relief as well. It was good to see squads utilizing certain tools and coordinating in a way that made pushes effective as a group. We could argue what this is a byproduct of. Is it because we've had 8 playtests now, so people are starting to get it and understand what to expect when they are playing or how to play maybe? But overall, there's probably no real reason to argue about anything because it appears that the infantry overhaul is knocking at the door. If you missed it, OWI released a dev blog talking about their thoughts on the update. Now, if you haven't read the dev blog, I'll post it in the description below so you can check it out. It's pretty dense and it covers a lot of different topics, but let me point out a few things that I think are interesting. OWI pointed out very early the sort of foundational elements for why the infantry overhaul exists, and the shift towards more coordinated teamwork, longer firefights, and a diverse player experience are all really important things, and I think those are really cool to feature better in squad, and I totally agree with those as sort of directional changes. And given the examples I've given you earlier of the 2 rounds that I felt most encompassed what these changes are about, it's happening. And these are all adjustments that are made through tweaks to suppression, gunplay, and character movement. Not only do these factors play a big part in changing how infantry combat works, it also changes how the game works. That's something I've stressed repeatedly, is that it's going to alter your attack, it's going to alter your defense, and it's going to change the general strategies that are used in squad. And if that alone doesn't change your weapon selection, you may also be faced with slightly different kits and how certain things are going to work in terms of the role you select, which obviously adds some complexity on top of these changes. OWI goes into a lot of depth here in the dev blog about how certain feedback altered certain things that they were doing and the changes to combat based on the feedback. I think this first paragraph here highlights things very well. And as a player during the playtest, I've seen some of these results taking action. Again, I gave you 2 prime examples of them happening. They point out that they've seen an increase back and forth in terms of capturing and gunfight dynamics, resulting in more engaging and intense moments on the field of combat. They also mentioned that it's changed how teams are using the maps and vehicles, which I think is going to be really important as this rolls out, which inevitably has made vehicles more important and more of a thing that you're going to need to utilize on the battlefield. Tied to the change in how the vehicles are utilized, they're also looking at how effective the vehicles actually have become given these updates. Given the changes to character movement in terms of slowing the character down, reducing stamina, as well as adding the feature of suppression and how powerful it is, it makes sense that the vehicles are super strong, especially against infantry. I'm not sure how they would tweak the balancing of this, whether they start reducing suppression or something along those lines, but I think given the changes elsewhere, the vehicles are important and it's making the vehicles more a piece of the battlefield. So I'm not really sure if they mean that they need to reduce some of that power against other infantry. I mean, that's my assumption. One thing OWI points out in this dev blog is that the changes to the infantry role have major benefits to new players. What they seem to have found is that now new players don't have to be great at spotting right off the bat to make a contribution to their team. Instead, cooperating with their team can give them a better impact with their squad, their team, and everything like that, which I would assume helps them learn how to play. But I do have some difficulty with this because I feel like new players would take current live version of Squad and be able to pick that up much faster from a gunplay perspective than utilizing the new mechanics that are going to be in place. I worry about how the new mechanics are going to affect new players coming on board. Are they going to find it too difficult and therefore not play before they ever get a chance to really cooperate with a squad or a team? I feel like the cooperation aspect comes in time as you begin to just understand the basics. But I think initially people are just trying to figure out if they can shoot the weapons, if they can get around easily, how they operate, before cooperation ever really comes into play. Not that I don't think cooperation is important. It's very important. It is critical in Squad. The game is kind of functions with cooperation being a pinnacle aspect of how to win and how to compete. That's vastly different from a lot of the games out there that many new players may be coming from. Now, after this portion of the dev blog, OWI breaks down a ton of things based on factions and giving authenticity to certain factions. They go into more depth about bullet penetration, suppression system, and a ton of other stuff, including sort of weapon classes and how certain weapons are going to do certain things differently. And in the wrap up, they give some finality to the process of building the infantry overhaul. The one area of concern is this one line. Our approach involves adding some final finishing touches post-launch. I think we can all agree that's unsurprising, but a little bit worrisome. This is something that's been a concern since the playtest started. How many playtests will there be to kind of work out some of the features and some of the mechanics and really give a polished experience? We all realize Squad and every other game out there is going to have bugs. It's going to have things that maybe don't run as well, whether it's performance, whether it's a rock floating on a map, whatever, something is there to take you out of the experience. And I don't expect everything to be perfect. It's impossible, but what I do get worried about is adding this layer of complexity to how infantry fighting happens on top of a game that still needs some polish and some work to get it into a place that operates really, really great and maybe begins to attract these new players and continues to hold on to current players, veterans of Squad. But regardless, it's here. So we're going to have to accept it or not. I'm excited to try this on a more consistent basis and not just by weekend, but it wasn't long ago that we had a playtest where if you died, the game crashed. We also had the last playtest, playtest 7, where your gun was glitching kind of back and forth and refreshing. I say all that to say that I'm just a little bit concerned about having this sort of update layered on top of what we already have in Squad. We all know that there's some bugs and there's some finicky things, but we do know that this new piece of mechanics is something very new that's going to still require some polish. It still needs an appropriate amount of love to get it to where it probably should be. And at the same time, it's not something that is overly forgiving or easy to adapt to. It's going to require a little bit of a learning curve. So what does that make the experience like for a lot of new players and veteran players? Obviously, this update caters to folks that are looking for something closer to a milsim experience. But it's going to be hard to gain that milsim experience if it is buggy or if it does have performance issues. It's going to actually do the opposite, in my opinion. It's going to make it more difficult to play and enjoy. I just hope that folks will give it the appropriate amount of time for them to work out bugs, considering it is being dropped upon the live version of Squad. And that hope for players to have that sort of patience isn't because I disagree with the mechanics or I don't agree with the direction of Squad. I'm actually excited to be able to dabble with this on more than just a weekend by weekend basis. I want it full time so that I can begin to improve my skill set. But in reality, we all want a good experience out of this update. This is huge. This is a significant change in the direction of Squad, and it comes with a lot of layers. So how will it be received? Will it be ready? I guess we'll find out. See you next time.